your email. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm sorry, I just turned on the recording. Go ahead.
Yeah. I said I read your email, how the topics we're gonna discuss tonight sound very interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Chris, aloha, brother. How are you? No sound tonight? Okay. Chris has been wonderful. We're putting up our greenhouse out in the back uh, pasture now in my garden. It's quite a project. I think it's turned out to be a lot bigger project than any of us thought it would be. It's 30 by 48 feet, and the top of it, I think, looks like it's about 20 feet tall, right up in the air or something. And Chris has been wonderful, just absolutely there every minute of the way. And it's been good because my back is shot and I don't have the ability to do a lot of hard physical labor anymore. So having him there doing that is just really important. Okay. Well, I think it'll be a great night tonight. I'm just going to wait for a few more people to come on and we'll get into it. Hi, Jason.
Good evening.
Good evening. How you feeling? Are you doing okay?
Doing great. Thank you.
Your ankle okay? You didn't get too worn out on the other day on Sunday, did you, or Saturday?
No, all's good. All's
All
good.
right,
Thank you.
good. So tonight, I think it's the core principle of enlightenment is obviously, we've talked about this before, is to get in touch with reality. And I've mentioned before on several occasions that the only definition for the word God that could possibly make any sense is that God is all that is. And I will go a little step further and will say that God is reality and God is love. So I want to work out a way tonight that we can get you all to really get clear about why God, reality, all that is, and love are really the same thing. You're describing the same thing. And the problem that we've got in this culture is that God has been anthropomorphized, excuse me. He's been turned into a human. He's a man, and he has a son, and there's no wife mentioned. There's no woman involved in any of this stuff. And really, this is all coming from Western religions, primarily the Judeo-Christian ethic, going back to Abraham. So the Jewish faith, Islam, and Christianity all have at their core that kind of an identification of that word God. And the problem with it is most people have become so conditioned to believe in God as being another human-like being that when I talk about God being all it is, they have a really hard time holding on to that. It just doesn't seem like it could possibly be real. What does that mean? It's too nebulous. So I'd like to use this example. Water. Is a glass full of water the only kind of water that can exist? What about the
No,
ocean? Huh?
I'm sorry. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. A river, a pond, a raindrop, a cloud. All of those things are a form of water. And we don't have any problem saying that about water. We understand that water is water. It's not confined to the container that we put it in. Is God any different? Now, I'm asking that not as a rhetorical question. Is God any different? Do we have to put God in some kind of a container before God is God?
No, God is all that is and all that exists.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Certainly, most of Western civilization, even the Greek gods, are anthropomorphic,
Yeah.
and the Egyptian gods were kind of mixed, tended to be mixed animal and human, but even they were mostly anthropomorphic. So it seems to be almost inherent in human nature to try to uh, envision the divine as something familiar, i.e., himself.
Yeah, of course it is. That's the natural thing to do. And when we realize these religions, they got their start, in the case of Abraham, approximately 4 to 5 thousand years ago. And people in those days uh, did not have the technological sophistication. They didn't have education. The vast majority of people could not read or write. And so trying to talk about these concepts of a divine being and divinity and all that stuff was very difficult for these folks. Is that John? Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Welcome.
How are you doing?
We're doing great. We're talking about God tonight, and I just brought up the idea that human beings have this tendency to need to make God be a container. And I use the example of water. Does water need to come in a glass before we recognize it as water? Does it need to come as a river? Does it need to come as an ocean, a raindrop? Water is water. And it can take many, many different shapes and forms. God's the same way. God is God, and it doesn't have to come in a human package in order for it to be, or for God to be all that God is. God is all that is. And it's a universal essence out of which everything is made. We talk about the matrix, or we talk about, this entire spectrum of existence throughout the universe. And it really isn't, to me, it's much harder to imagine God as a anthropomorphic being here on this planet that had a son that had to die on a cross for our sins. And yet I look out at the universe and I see billions of galaxies with billions upon billions of stars with billions of planets, and there's life throughout all of that. For us to think that there is no other life out there and that this is the only place where human beings exist, and this is the one place out of all these billions and trillions of planets that human beings that with our kind of consciousness could have evolved, and just so that God can separate the wheat from the chaff and send a bunch of us to hell, and so a few of us that are worthy can live with God in heaven. Now, I want to say something really important here as I get into this, and I want to do it at the beginning. As I said last week, all of us can be moral. We can live relatively moral lives. Religions are there for a purpose. All religions are also a part of God, aren't they? If God is all that is, then every religion no matter what it is, has to be a part of God. So it's a perfect part of a perfect universe. And what these religions are like, when I learned how to play the piano, which apparently the lessons didn't take too well, because after I got out of my music lessons when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I never played it much again. But we'd have this little chart that you'd set up in front of the keys. And you could see this is a C and this is an A and this is whatever this is. And you would use that chart as kind of a cheat sheet. And when we look at God through religious eyes, that's what it's sort of like to me. It's a step in the direction that we want to go. It's certainly not going to get you to enlightenment. When you get to that place where you're really, really wanting to be on that path of enlightenment, religion then becomes a detriment. It's not an advantage. You have to overcome a lot of religious training in order to be able to do that. It's like you can't sit there and look at that little key chart on the top of the piano keys and ever learn how to play a great piece of jazz or some great piano piece. If you're relying on something like that, it'll never happen. So I'm not making religions bad or wrong, and whatever religion anybody is in is perfect for them. Is that clear? Am I making that clear enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So the religions have a purpose. We might look at it as training wheels on a bicycle. But at some point, if you really want to be good at riding that bicycle or at playing that piano or whatever we're talking about, you got to get rid of the training wheels. You got to be able to start going a step beyond. Now, why would enlightenment and understanding God at a much deeper level than what religions teach? I'd like some opinions from you all about why you think that might be important.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, I don't know if my microphone's working yet. Is it?
it's working.
Very good.
Okay. What was the question again?
The question is, when we're wanting to be enlightened, and I keep saying that understanding God as the all that is, that's the beginning step on that path that leads to enlightenment. And why would that be? Why is understanding the true nature of God really key to taking your spiritual life beyond that of religions?
My view is that I relate God to consciousness, divine consciousness, and that's our connection to God is through our consciousness. He gave us consciousness. We have it. It's probably the greatest thing we could have. Something to be thankful for. But that is my primary definition of God. He's the consciousness of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. And as all that is, that's really important. But why is that so important?
Can I say something?
Yeah,
I think why it's so important is because that's the cornerstone of whatever you build on. You've got to have that real and in alignment with reality, so that that's the cornerstone of everything else that comes out of it.
right.
So if you don't have that right, if the cornerstone's not right, then the whole building's not going to be right.
Yeah, exactly. And God being all that is the essence of reality. Now, there are several people in here that are scientists. I'm a scientist. John, I know, is a scientist. My son Jason, who's on, is maybe not a scientist per se, but he is as committed to discovering the essence of reality in everything he touches, just like a scientist. Chris, you know, all of you're people who want to go beyond religion to find out what? To find out what's real. Why is finding out what's real so important?
You mean little R or big R?
The big R, the
Big R.
universal R, not
Well, one of the things that I think of with religion is, she said it was the cornerstone. I think of it as the kind of an introduction to the principles of what God is, and you know, the omniscience, you know, omnipresence, things like that. And it's at least it's kind of like in science when you're taking undergraduate class, actually high school classes and undergraduate and going up. The more and more you learn, the more and more you learn that it's not true. And it's not until you get to very advanced thought, or at least start thinking outside the box, that you really finally get a clue of what really is going on. In other words, the paradigms that they set up in science classes are kind of a training wheels, if you will, of the principles that ultimately you'll have to accept, but you'll have to throw out a lot of what you learned along the way.
Yeah.
Because they're too limiting.
Yeah.
Very, very limiting. And you got to think, you got to go outside the box.
that's a good way to look at it. They're too limiting. The principles, it's just something at an elementary level has to be transcended to get to a deeper level, to have deeper levels of understanding.
Yeah, Don, by the way, Don is a scientist too, but he's just a physicist. So I don't know if you count that or not.
Just a physicist.
Yeah, just a physicist.
Yeah.
And Megan and Shannon are on with us tonight. Welcome, Megan and Shannon.
Yeah.
Would you like to introduce yourselves quickly so we know who you are?
Can you talk a little louder or turn your sound up? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Barely can hear you.
Try turning your sound up.
Okay, my Megan.
Mhm.
You.
Okay, and this is my girl. Hi.
Hi.
Aloha.
Hi.
Welcome.
Aloha.
Very glad you're here.
Oh.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so why is it, if enlightenment is about understanding reality with the big R, not the little r, and for Megan and Shannon, I'm going to just bring you up to speed a little bit. In Huna, we talk about the big R and the little r. The big R is ultimate reality. It is what it is, in spite of what anybody wants to think about it, in spite of what anybody wants to make it be. There is a reality with a capital R. That's what we mean by big R. And then each one of us have a personal reality, the little r. Oftentimes we hear the words perception equals reality. Those are those little r's. And the little r's are very confusing and very limiting. It is very hard for people to get past their little r's because people by nature need to be right. And if you can't be right, then you may not survive. That's a mechanism in our spirit that the Hawaiians call the ku. And the emotional side of us, or the subconscious, is the same thing if we look at it in Western terms. That subconscious needs to be right. It doesn't want to feel like it's not right. And when it encounters an outside influence that doesn't agree with its version of reality, that little r, the next thing that it wants to do is it wants to make the other person or that other little r reality wrong or bad. And that's ultimately what's underneath all the dysfunction that's going on in our world today. Now, science in the physical realms is about trying to discover what's real with a capital R. And so the key to science is always retaining an open mind and allowing yourself to gather as many facts as you possibly can. And there is no reason why, and I'm going to throw this out there, there is no reason why, and I hope somebody decides they want to argue with me about this, because I think it'd be a great debate thing. There is no reason why in our needing to look at the world, why science can't apply to spiritual things as well as physical things. The same approach that works so well to produce the advances we have in technology, the abilities we have in so many areas of life now that we didn't have 1,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. And that's not to say that those people 5,000 years ago didn't have a lot of incredible things going for them. Maybe we've forgotten things that they knew that would do us a lot of good today. But nevertheless, science has developed an understanding of our world. That's not like the Catholic Church insisted, that the sky at nighttime is those things that are up there, light, are holes that are allowing us to see where God dwells in heaven with his angels and spirits. Now today we know that those things are stars, and in many cases they're galaxies containing billions of stars. And all of that reality that we've been able to understand and see is way beyond what we were able to understand and see even when I was in college, 50 years ago. The advances are dramatic. Now, why is science not interested in spirituality?
Well, we could discuss that for hours, but a real thumbnail sketches in my mind, and if you take some time to learn the history of science, during the Renaissance period, or the Age of Enlightenment, as it was called, science was hijacked by people who believed that the human mind could in fact be as great as God, and therefore constructed an entire universe based on materials only, without spirit. They denied the existence of spirit. And what we're finding now in the 21st century is that most of our theories are, especially in the area of physics, are falling apart. I don't know if there are any Big Bang fans out there, but toward the end of those series, they were admitting that science really hasn't advanced in the last, physics, I should say, has not advanced in the last 40 years. And more scientists are coming around to the belief that they have to place consciousness as the foundation of a framework of the universe rather than space and time.
Right.
And so that is really starting to take off now. There are entire groups around the country, including the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, which Albert Einstein made famous decades ago, that are basically saying space-time as a framework just does not explain our reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can remember when I was taking astrogeophysics and quantum mechanics 50 some years ago at the University of Colorado. There was a big argument that had gone on between Albert Einstein and the father of quantum mechanics. I'm trying to remember his name, not Niels Bohr.
Well, Niels Bohr was one, but Max Planck was the other.
Yeah. And talking about, Einstein thought the idea that consciousness being able to uh, affect an experience of, or an experiment, like what would happen when they would send photons through slits in a plate. Or then after that, the big one when I was in college was the idea that if a photon was split and went in two different directions and you could let it go to where it was a long ways between each other, move one and the other one moves instantly. And that's what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. And he had a real hard time with that. And there was a real argument in the scientific community about whether or not quantum mechanics was real or was it just a bunch of witch doctory stuff because of consciousness, what you said. The idea that our consciousness can affect the outcome of experiments. Now we know that light doesn't really have a speed. It doesn't travel. It very simply is. And from its point of view, whether it's here or, on another planet or coming from a sun that is hundreds of thousands of light years away, we have this concept of light traveling through space for hundreds of thousands of years. From light's point of view, it hasn't traveled anywhere. It just is. And now we see a lot of really interesting experiences. I mentioned this once before. I don't know if you were here for that, Don, and some of you may or may not have been here. But the idea of telepathy is starting to gain a lot of traction. And why is because we've discovered these little structures in our inner ears that have patches of electrons. They're called Gray's patches that exist wherever the electric signal has to go from the end of one neuron to the other. And those electrons are quantum particles. And the nature of quantum particles is that that electron can be in my brain in one instance. It can be in Don's brain in another instant. It can be in John's brain in another instant. And it can be on the surface of Mars in another instant. It could be, 8 billion light years away in another instant, and then back in my brain. And these electrons, when they come off of the Gray's patch and they wind up in your brain on a Gray's patch, if they go across that gap, you may have the same thought I had when I had that electron in my brain. And that may be the basis of telepathy.
Mhm.
I can tell you that dogs are awfully good at that. Many dogs have an ability, and animals in general, I should say, have an ability to really get your vibe. And they know when it's dangerous and when it's not. Almost every night now, we've had probably 50 head of elk in our backyard. And Lonnie and I will go out to take a hot tub. And when we go out, we lift up the lid on the hot tub and they'll look at us and we look back and we're really sweet to them. Somebody else can come out that they don't recognize or know, or that has an attitude that elk are to eat and you should just kill them. They know that. And they will scatter off that salt lick and they'll be gone. And which is an interesting thing to contemplate if you're a hunter. If you're out there hunting with a rifle and you're getting ready to kill an animal, those animals know that. And they make themselves scarce. And that's why old world people like Native Americans and people in South America, when they do their ayahuasca ceremonies, what they do is the night before they pray. And they don't want to hurt the animal. They have great respect for the animal. And they basically tell the spirit world, we need something to eat. Our family needs something to eat. So please show us an animal that we can take respectfully that can feed our family. And in ayahuasca ceremonies, what would happen is that people would get a vision. The whole tribe that's getting ready to go hunting, they get a vision. And that vision will say, be at this bend of the river at this time in the morning. You're going to see this animal. It's going to be doing this. That's the animal you can take. Don't take any other animal. And so the people would go out, they'd be at the river at that appointed time. Sure enough, there's the animal. And that's the animal they take. And because that's the way they do it, they never starve. Now, John, you being a hunter, you might want to know that. That's an important element of hunting, is you pray and you don't go out there with the intention. I'm not saying you do this, John, but I'm just saying in general. It really works to be grateful for the opportunity, to be grateful for the life that is going to be sacrificed so that you can have life. And if you have that spirit, you're going to have a much better hunt than if you have the other spirit as I'm going to kill that damn thing.
Well, I just tell the elk that I'm out there taking pictures. I just want some good pictures. And I don't remember you suggesting us praying for the right elk when we were sitting in the hot tub up there.
I was sitting in the hot tub. I wasn't hunting.
Yeah, but that's when we should have been praying for the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. That's right.
Yeah.
So my point being, I just want to amplify what Don said and what you said, John, and that is that as we go along, we're starting to see dimensions of reality that we never expected. And every time we get into a higher dimension, we can see elements that we couldn't see from the lower dimension. Isn't that true? And when we see more, all of a sudden we have more choices, don't we? And that's where I'm trying to get to with enlightenment and understanding the true nature of God. God is about reality. God is reality. Those two words, I think reality is even a better word for that consciousness than God. Because reality is conscious. Consciousness is a part of reality. Is it not? And being a part of reality, there's form, but there's spirit, and that consciousness, that awareness is a godly attribute, as Chris said. And it's extremely important that we come to understand that God doesn't have to be in an anthropomorphic form, as religions have taught us. Just no more than a glass of water. It can't, water outside of a glass is still water, whether it's a pond or a stream or an ocean. And God is the same way. Reality is. And to answer my question about science, I think that Don had a good point. I would like to say that probably not in place of, but in addition to what you said, Don, the Catholic Church in those days was the authority. Whatever the Catholic doctrine was as far as the world was concerned, was reality. And so if the Catholics thought that there was a big bowl and all these lights are holes in the top of that bowl, and that's heavenly parents, heavenly realms on the other side of that, and all of this dogma that they use in order to get people invested in their way of looking at life, all of that's great, but it's not real. And it created in those days a hell of a fight between people like Galileo and Newton and, all of these early scientists that had to have a lot of bravery to come out and say what they were saying. Galileo was locked in a tower because he was considered a blasphemy, in teaching these ideas. Even Darwin, in Darwin's time, came under a huge amount of criticism from Christians and people who would not accept the idea that evolution is a possibility. So the angst between religion and science is another major reason why science just backed off of anything to do with the spirit world. Because number one, what they did have is objective tools to measure the world of form objectively. And it was just easier to stay with those objective tools because those are facts that they could talk about. And it made it pretty hard for some church to go out there and damage them. And there are a lot of years between the 1500s and today where the church did a lot of damage to science. And if you spoke out, you could be in a lot of trouble. It still goes on today. There are people out there that still believe that the earth is flat. There are people out there that still believe that God created the world, 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, and I think it's 6,000 years ago. And they'll argue that to the death. They'll talk about how scientists are full of it when they talk about evolution, and they come up with all of these ideas to try to prove that the idea of evolution is false. And I'm not saying that everything in science is true. What I'm saying is the attitude that needs to make any kind of objective science wrong and bad when the conclusions don't support some religious dogma, that's destructive. We are finally at a place in our society where religions have lost a lot of that capacity. And so more and more science is coming out. But now we're starting to see dimensions of science that are just another religion.
That's right. Instead of religious dogma, we have scientific dogma.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we're told it's settled science. You can't question it, which
Yeah.
is the biggest
Same.
lie.
Yeah.
And anybody
that
who's
is-
a scientist, a real scientist, the instant you say that, they'd say, whoa, sorry, you're
Yeah,
missed the point.
it's the antithesis of true science is to say that everything's settled and don't ask any questions.
Yeah, exactly. So the point I'm trying to make here is that God is reality, and God has a spiritual side and a physical side. Spirit is the blueprint for form. And that intelligence, that consciousness, that awareness that we call God is in every one of us. And it's in my little dog, and it's in that tree out there, and it's everywhere. The whole earth is a testament to the intelligence of that all that is. And if we want to deal scientifically with spirit, we have to use subjective tools. And if you're a scientist, that's going to, I see Don's eyes looking up right now. I can see, I can see where that is a trigger point for a lot of people, but I'll point out a fact. Spiritually, there is a way we can tell whether something is spiritually true or not spiritually true. Now, you can't weigh it, and you can't put a tape measure on it, and there's no objective way to do that. But there is a very reliable spiritual way to do that, and that is what works. Does it work? If something works the way we expect it to work, then we can know that that's real with a capital R. We have a lot of, we have a couple of ladies on the thing, on the program tonight. I'm grateful for you. What works better? To look at you as an object of some kind? Do you like it when men look at you as objects? Or to look at you as beautiful divine beings who have a gift for me? Which one of those things is going to make for the better relationship between us?
Not as objects.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're
Yep.
not an object. You're a beautiful divine being that has a gift for us. And if we treat you with respect, we're going to have an awful lot better relationship than if we treat women as objects. In business, if a businessman treats his customer with respect, that's a fellow divine being, and my job as a businessman is to offer my service. I've mastered a gift or a talent so that I can be in the circle of life and give that gift or talent back to everybody else in the circle of life in a spirit of service, loving service. Does that work better? Or does it work better to say, you know, I got this whole bunch of people I can market my crap to and maybe make a buck? And spiritually, you know that. It doesn't even take, you know that as well as if I go down to the lumber yard and put a tape measure on a 2x4 by 8 foot. If it, I can see, oh yeah, that was 8 foot. It works. And that is what we have to realize we measure spiritual things by. Does it work? God created our world with universal principles. When we operate in harmony with those principles, things work. Life energy flows. One of the things I find fascinating between Western cultures and the Hawaiians and many other forms of Eastern cultures is they have a word for life energy called mana. Mana. Mana flows. That's what it means, mana, life energy that flows. How many times do you hear anybody that's a scientist or otherwise in this culture talk about life energy flowing as a essence of something that's so important? But those old world cultures, they do. Mana is extremely important. I remember when we were in Hawaii, there's when I had Ohana teaching with me there at our group there was another fellow named Eugene. And Eugene was a native Hawaiian, and he was Nakoa. And Nakoa were the king's favorite warriors. These were the guys that, if the king wanted something done, they'd go to the Nakoa, and the Nakoa would get it done for him. So Kahana was talking about Nakoa, and Eugene was in the room, and somebody wanted to know, well, what does mana really mean? And Kahana looked over at Eugene and kind of nodded at him. And Gene knew exactly what he was asking him to do. And he went up to this person and he went, mana! And beat his chest right in front of them. They damn near crapped their pants. That's mana. These guys have mana. They don't fool around. We had a garden I needed to get done. And there was a a guy there named Bill who had needed a place to stay, and we had a facility up the hill behind the main center that he could stay in. And I asked him in exchange for staying there to get a garden done for us. And Lonnie has mentioned this before. He would come down every other day with these plans. Well, I think I'm going to do it this way. And well, I've decided I'm going to do it this way. And here we are 3 weeks later, and there's still no garden. So finally, we had this one guy who was
Was he from Ethiopia?
Ethiopia. Yeah. And man, he
Black guy.
was as black can get, and extremely
Native. Very
native, old world kind of person. And he said, "Do you mind if I put in the garden?" And I said, "I'd love it." He went out there, and in 2 days, this entire garden was in. We were growing all of our medicinal herbs. We had 18 different kinds of exotic fruits. We had coffee. We had oranges. We had grapefruit. We had coffee trees that were there that he was able to get organized and sorted out. We had 6 different kinds of bananas. You know, these are people who are used to working, not thinking. They don't confuse the two. They think only as much as they need to get the job done. They're kind of like Chris out of the greenhouse yesterday on Saturday. Chris, you just went for it, you know, and you had an idea and you'd say, let's do this, and you go do it. And it's so fantastic to have people that have that capacity of just getting into it and doing it. And reality is that way. Reality responds when we do things. And it doesn't matter if you do them correctly, because the way that God built this world, it's you get into it, you start doing it, and all of a sudden it's like this big empty bowl, and you have all of this intelligence and awareness, and these ideas start popping in there. And you don't know how you're going to do this before you start the project, but you just get in and you start doing it. And you know, the next thing you know, this inspiration happens, that inspiration happens, and you get to the end of the project and it's beautiful, and you don't have a clue as to how you would have done it ahead of time. But just by getting into it and doing the work, that's the key. And in that story we have, we'll talk more about this another time. I'm getting it published as a book. You'll be able to get it if you want. But the bowl in the garden, that's got one of the most important principles in it that you can possibly imagine. When that bowl, when we dump these heavy rocks of judgment out of that bowl, it fills up with light automatically. Automatically. We don't have to create the light and put it in the bowl. Just empty the thing out of all of these beliefs, and the bowl will fill up with light automatically. For those of you who don't know, that's the original story of the Garden of Eden that the Hawaiians knew by the time the missionaries ever got to Hawaii. And when they gave them that story of the bowl in the garden after the missionaries were trying to teach them about the Bible and Genesis and God creating man and woman in the Garden of Eden, they said, oh, we've heard that story before. We have a similar story. We like ours better. And when the missionaries heard the Hawaiian story, they got so upset, they actually banned the Hawaiian language. You could no longer have your kids live in the home with their parents. They were taken out of their homes and placed in schools where they had no more contact. It was illegal to speak Hawaiian in Hawaii after that. Did you know that? True. And kahuna were illegal up until Hawaii in the 50s sometime, when before kahuna could actually come out and teach these ways again. Because the missionaries were so upset that the Hawaiians had these original stories, and it completely blew up the Bible. And for any of you, I challenge you, read the story of the bull in the garden, then read the stories in Genesis, and you tell me which one makes the most sense and is the most powerful. Just like we talked about treating a woman with respect, you can know, you don't have to believe it. And the same thing with these stories. As soon as you read it, you know, yeah, I get it. I get it. And I get what that story was supposed to be about. And that's why it made the missionary so upset. The idea that this supposed backward people could possibly know more and do something that would damage their belief in the Bible was just intolerable to them. Now,
The bowl in the garden is much more detail, a lot more detail,
yeah,
and it's much more in depth than what Genesis has to say about the garden. It's like
yeah,
it's
what you-
actually got object lessons and all kinds of things in there, principles, and they don't have that in the garden. You got to kind of speculate on what the lessons are in the Garden of Eden in the Bible. That's
yeah,
why you hear pastors have all kinds of stories they can tell about that because they can make it up. They can make a lot of things fit.
yeah.
No,
And
but
go
more
ahead.
importantly, the bull in the garden, to put it, as simply as possible, has a happy ending, right? We're not, humans are not kicked out of the garden and told you'll live by the sweat of your brow and you're condemned and the salvation was within the community that was there already. You didn't have to wait 2,000 years for salvation.
What makes life hard? And that's what that story teaches us. What makes life hard is all our beliefs about what's good and bad, right and wrong, and worthy and unworthy. That four-headed dragon we've brought up a couple of times. You know, worthy and unworthy. Well, we were told right at the beginning in that story that you're unworthy. You're born unworthy because of something that Eve and Adam did thousands of years ago. And I've said this before, and do I catch hell every time I say it, but it's absolutely true. Back not too many years ago, Black people were discriminated against by Christians. Christians thought that slavery was appropriate. All those plantations in the South were run by Christian people who believed that Black people were cursed because they were descendants of Cain, and Cain killed his brother Abel, and God made them black to distinguish them from the rest of the population so that they would go through the rest of eternity in hell. Why? Because their father Cain committed murder against his brother Abel. That is disgusting. That is utterly disgusting. It's as disgusting as it can get. And in those days of the plantations and back when they were taking people, it was other Black people selling Black people into slavery. They didn't have that idea, but the people they were selling the slaves to thought it was perfectly appropriate because these Black people, they were kind of like horses or sheep or cattle. And how they got into that position was because of what happened in the Garden of Eden when Cain killed Abel. Did any of you know that?
Well, one of the things about the slavery is that, of course, it's very prominent. It was very prominent in Africa at the time, but there were a lot of slave owners here in the United States that were Black. And
Yes.
it kind of goes with the culture that one tribe could have the other tribe as slaves.
Yeah.
In fact, that even applies to the Indians, the indigenous peoples. They would conquer one tribe and they take them as slaves. So this is something that's part of human nature.
Yeah. Right now in China, the Uyghurs are being held in slavery. In South America, there are lots of Native American tribes that are still being held in slavery. down there to big Western corporations and that kind of thing, and to the drug cartels.
Mhm.
So what I'm trying to say is that that's the kind of stuff that came out of the Bible. And you can't deny it. It's, you're not in, you can be entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And the fact is that the Bible is responsible for slavery. It's responsible for a lot of the antagonism that happened between groups of people. The whole thing we're going through right now in the Middle East, that's a whole argument started in the Old Testament when
Mhm.
Abraham supposedly had two sons, and the Arabs think that Isaac was the usurper. He was the younger son. He should not have the birthright. The older son, I
don't
say his
know.
name all the time. I don't know why I just forgot it just now. But the son of Hagar, his handmaiden, was the older son, and
Ishmael.
Ishmael was supposed to have all of Abraham's inheritance, and Abraham supposedly went out to this rock and sacrificed, or was going to sacrifice his son Jacob on this rock at God's direction, but then God said, "Just kidding, just testing your faith." And so now here's this ram that I sent for you to get tangled up in that bush, and you can kill it and sacrifice it. What kind of God needs you to kill an animal and spill its blood to be proved anything? That
I'm
is,
Elohim,
yeah, yeah,
an Elohim. Yes.
yeah, exactly. You want to go into that a little more? I
Well,
know,
there's
but I don't know that a lot of people do.
well, there's a guy named Mario Biglino who's been 20 years researching in the Bible. He's done a lot of translation, and there's a book out uh, where they go. He's gone through the whole Old Testament, and he's come to the conclusion, which after reading his book, I agree with. There are no gods in the Bible.
Mhm.
They are all Elohims, and the Elohim and Yahweh was a mid-ranking Elohim, and he's the one that the Jewish community, or part of the Jews, he didn't even lead all the Jews. It was just a segment of the Jews that he was God over. And you get into his book, and it's quite fascinating. They actually had spacecraft when you do the interpretations right. When they after the uh, Jews left Egypt and spent 40 years in the desert, you start going into those stories and relating to them, and it's a whole different story than we were taught.
Yeah,
And Yahweh was not a very high ranking Elohim; it was a mid ranking Elohim. And they gave him the Jews because they had no country. So he wound up with a group that he led that had no country. So he had to conquer land. And you're looking at these Elohim, like the Baal was also an Elohim, which they did all the child sacrifices to. All the sacrifices were made to Baal, which was in essence another Elohim. And there were probably who knows how many there were, but it's quite a fascinating story. And there's another Paul Wallace has written several books on this as well, and that's why I personally hate to use the word God, because these individuals that were Elohim have diminished the term, and I think almost to me it's almost disrespectful to the Creator to call him God.
What's the book called, Chris? Remember?
Well,
I'll go get it. I'll go get the book. Show it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's. I'll be right back.
All right.
yeah. By the way, I have thought about this quite a bit, and whether or not I should put together a presentation on some of the latest archaeology that has been discovered that leads into some of these ideas. And if you think that would be a fascinating thing to do, I'd be happy to do it. Moses was really, I don't want to get into it tonight. It's going
No,
off the
some
topic
after
too far.
7.
But go ahead, let's see your books.
It's Mario Biglino, The Naked Bible.
The
Right.
Naked Bible. Okay, great. We'll have to look at that.
And it's quite thoughtfully done, and I agree with it. It's there's another book that's quite interesting. It's an older book. It's called the Shining Ones, which is a story basically of the Elohim, how they got here, how the garden, where they created the Garden of Eden, and they had several of them. They call them Gans, and they were protected in closed areas.
Yeah.
And there's the thing about this is I didn't understand myself personally is I thought the Bible was the final
Yeah.
term on it but actually when you get into it, there's all kinds of literature out there that's written at that time by other writers and historians, ancient historians, that provide a lot of very interesting details that you don't get out of the Bible.
Well, there's a lot of problems that are happening right now because, number one, the reason why so many of these ancient documents don't exist anymore is because back in those days, the early church fathers, just after Jesus was here, and the next 200 or 300 years, they were very, very adamant about destroying any document they could find in any library that took away from Paul's narrative of who Jesus was. Paul was really the founder of Christianity, not Jesus.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know that either. So we'll talk a lot about that in the future. I'm aware of that book, and I think you're right. It's absolutely well worth reading.
Yeah.
It's not a goofy a book at all.
Yeah, that book is actually available online as a PDF for free.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, you can find it for free and download it.
We'll need to look at that. So reality or God is not compressed into some little anthropomorphic package any more than we can put the ocean in a glass of water. And consciousness is absolutely one. We talk about spirit and form, but what is spirit? Spirit is consciousness, isn't it? And if we understand reality and don't talk about it in terms of God, because that word just messes up people's brain because of religion. If we talk about reality, then what we want to do is we want to say, okay, what do I know for sure? And that's why you'll hear me saying Huna all the time. What can we know for sure? We always start there. And as I said earlier, spiritual realities will work. And it's like opening up a door and you're going to walk in a room that's brighter than the room you were in before. And you're going to find out something, just like with science in the world of form. There's another half a dozen doors in that room. And you got to walk through the next door. And you'll be in a room that's even brighter. And there'll be more doors in that room. And you got to walk through that door to go into another room that's even brighter. And that's the way science works. And that's the way science of spirit works too. And the farther you take this path of enlightenment, the less fear you're going to have.
Sorry, that's my phone.
Oh, the more you're going to be able to see choices that you couldn't see before that work better. And your life is going to be able to be constructed in such a way that you haven't dug a lot of holes for yourself that you're going to step in and break a leg. And you'll be in a place where life gets peaceful. And all of a sudden, money is not that important anymore. Obviously, we all need money in order to live, but your priorities aren't going to be about getting money. Your priority is going to be about how can I improve my ability to give my gift back to the circle of life. And that will result in more abundance. But which one of those things is less corrupting to your soul? The idea that I need a lot of money and I win when I have more money than my neighbor, or the idea that I really want to get good at what I do and I want to give it back to the circle of life in an attitude of loving service. And there's going to be lots and lots and lots of growth. It's a lifetime thing. It is not something where you can sit in a monastery in Tibet and all of a sudden one day you're in nirvana and you're enlightened. It's not like that. For those people, I'm not making them wrong or bad. And certainly all that meditation is going to give them an ability to see dimensions of themselves that other people can't see or wouldn't see in themselves. But that's not the same thing as enlightenment per se. Enlightenment is about being able to see choices that you didn't even know you had. And it applies not only to personal spiritual growth, it applies to everything. How many of you remember the TV series Kung Fu? Do you remember that with what was the name of the guy that's played the martial artist? But you remember Kung Fu? Do any of you remember Kung Fu? You do, John.
Yeah, I
Chris
remember.
does. Well,
Was it Keith Carradine?
Keith
Or
Carradine,
what
that's
is-
it. Yeah. And it was supposed to be Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee turned down the role and they gave it to Keith Carradine. The bottom line is that this guy looked so poor. He wore rags. He'd walk into town. He was as humble as any human being could be. And people would want to start picking on him. And if they got him into a corner and they made him fight, he had choices because of his previous training about how to deal with that he wasn't worried. He could overcome virtually any weapon that was thrown at him just without a weapon. And I know that's a TV series, but in fact, that's what Kung Fu practiced by these monks is about seeing choices so that you don't have to wind up getting angry. You don't have to wind up unnecessarily hurting somebody. You can defend somebody without deadly force. That's what Kung Fu is about. Now, in the Western culture, everybody likes to see somebody else getting the crap kicked out of them, and let's cheer for that. And it's like a boxing match or something. But those people, they don't look at life that way. And what they want is choices. They want to get practiced. They want to get harmony between the Ku and the Lono, that place that's the subconscious and the conscious, and practice it to the point where it's absolutely flawless. And when they go out in the world, they don't worry about bullies, do they? That's enlightenment when it comes to martial arts. What about when it comes to medicine? How many of you feel comfortable going down to your doctor, getting a diagnosis, and going down to the drugstore and buying a pill that's supposed to take care of that problem? Any of you have any little worries about that? Especially when you see who the pharmaceutical industry is and how it operates? After you look at what happened with COVID, I was telling all of my patients, and some of you here know that because you were, at least John knows this for now, but I told everybody at the very beginning, this thing is not a vaccine. Whatever you do, don't take it. And you could also tell just there was no discussion allowed. There was no scientists that were allowed to give divergent opinions. That's not science. As soon as you see scientists not acting like scientists, you know something's up. So you know, I don't even know how many people I've helped who have had congestive heart failure because they're taking statins for high blood pressure. And as soon as I take them off of the statin and put them on a diet that human beings are designed to eat, and set all the crap that we put in our bodies and the sugar and the refined carbohydrates and the processed foods and the seed oils, if you're eating that way, you are not enlightened. And you are going to have some serious pain. The CDC just came out with a thing, 73% of everybody in this country between the ages of 18 and 35 are suffering from a metabolic disease that they have created through their diet that is going to kill them. That's not enlightened. And then we can get into the political side of things. When you sit here and you look at this trial with Donald Trump, I don't know if you like him or dislike him, but I can tell you as an American, what I see happening to him is bone chilling. And if they can do it to him, they can do it to anybody. So there are social principles that are involved that we need to remind ourselves of. It's an enlightened idea. The United States of America was founded on an enlightened principle. It's been warped completely out of shape at this point and almost buried. But the idea is that we get our rights from God, not from government. And because we get our rights from God and not from government, we have to be the owner of those rights, and we lend them to a government. They are not the government's first, and they are not constitutional rights. They don't come from the Constitution. Everybody says that all the time, and I take exception to it. They are not constitutional rights. They weren't created by the Constitution. They're created by God. The Constitution was created to remind people of where they come from and what the deal is. So those are enlightened social values, and those are the 4 areas we cover. Personal spiritual growth and development in this work, health, nutrition and wellness, relationship, and social values. And those are the subjects that we will keep going into. The classes go into them, and I hope that what I'm sharing with you are ideas that make a difference in your life. And the more you can wake up and learn how to talk in these terms, you're already brilliant. Every one of you is. And you're already tuned in, you're already educated. My goal is just to try to pull together a group of talent and well-meaning people that can make a difference and get this message out there in a broader and broader way. What we owe one another is the respect due a fellow divine being. And it doesn't matter if they have purple hair, or if they're a man dressed up as a woman, or if they're a woman that wants to shave her head and act like a man. We're all made out of God. And that's your individual trip. That's none of my business. I still owe you the respect due a fellow divine being. I may not agree with your set of values. I would certainly not be that way myself. I'm not interested in being gay. I'm not interested in dressing up in a tutu and putting lots of makeup on. I think it would scare the hell out of everybody if they saw me that way. But that doesn't mean somebody else can't do that. That's their choice. And it doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them unworthy. It may make them a little bit out there somewhere, and that's fine. They've got a choice. They'll get a consequence. But what we don't have the right to do is take a 10-year-old little girl and cut off her breasts, or a little boy and cut off his testicles and try to turn them into a woman before they even know what life is about. We don't have that right. That's violating somebody else's sacred space. So I'll open it to discussion now if anybody wants to discuss anything. Otherwise, we can be getting ready to wrap up. Don't all speak at once, please. What did you get out of this tonight? Anything new?
A lot. I've been taking notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about your daughter? Is she doing okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, everybody's doing okay, so.
All right. Anybody else? Well, you guys are all
quiet.
quiet, so I guess you're either digesting or sleeping. I hope you're digesting. And Chris,
Well,
will
one of the
see you tomorrow.
yeah.
Go ahead, John.
One of the things that Don and I have been doing lately, and kind of sticking our toe in the water, is looking at some of the episodes of the Y-Files. And one of them, I mean, the two that stick out is one has to do with meditation methods to be able to, in a sense, actually sense the dimensions beyond this little R reality, and perhaps see the void, have out of body experiences, and so forth. And then there's another one that's, in fact, these two messages kind of go together, is the simulation, that this is just a simulation, and that the simulation is based on the existence of the consciousness, which is God, and that we as parts of God are able to, in a sense, create the simulation that we live in, and the little R reality.
Yeah.
So it gives us a lot more insight into the fact that we're not victims of this little R reality. We actually, in some ways, create the reality that we see outside.
Well, we
And
create it all, don't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we talk about God as a creator, well, hello, we're divine beings. We are extensions of God. So yes, we all are the creator in that sense.
Let's take one step further.
Okay.
Remember what we said last week. God contains time.
Yeah. Yep.
Time does not contain God. If time contained God, then time would be all that there is.
Right.
And time.
Yeah, I need to send you the links to those two Y-Files. I probably did, because you're on my list for the Mad Science group,
Okay.
and you probably got them, but you probably get so many things. But I might just send them straight to you and make a note of them.
Okay.
But he's very entertaining, and he tends to talk about the very things that we talk about in our Saturday meetings.
Yeah.
It's just, and the Elohim also. I mean, we've talked about the Naked Bible in the past, and so this is all, so yep, tell me something else that is true. It's very interesting that there's so many of us that have caught on to the let's call it the religious the religious lies, because they really are lies.
Mhm.
Now, do they know they're lying? Probably not. But in their little box they live in, that's their little R reality.
Yeah.
So
I don't think that most of them know, but I know when I was in the monastery, and I know when I've talked to other people that are high up in various religions, they've come to the place where they now realize it's bullshit. But they're so invested in it. It's where they make their living. It's where they have their reputation. They've written books, they're authorities, and then to have to back up and say, okay, it's just the way it is, and they won't go into it. I'll tell you another thing that I find is quite interesting is I've had a lot of been blessed actually to have a lot of contact with several Buddhist Rinpoches. And when we were in Crestone, there was a big retreat center that was built by a doctor friend of mine. And I helped him. We raised money to buy dental chairs and dental equipment. And then he would take him over to these monasteries and train the monks how to provide dental care for people in their area, because it's basically not existent in places of Tibet and those kinds of places. And then he would bring these people over to this area, and we would put them up at places in Crestone. And at night, I would sit in the hot tub with many of these Rinpoches, and we would compare Buddhism to Huna. And you want to know what they had to say? That Huna was probably closer to what they're trying to teach than how most people look at Buddhism, only because of the language barrier and various kinds of ideas that have become sort of solidified, but they would actually come across even better if you use the Huna languaging. I'm not trying to make Huna better than Buddhism. I'm not trying to do that. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a uniform set of principles that are true in every culture, and how we hear about these principles is languaging that comes to us through a culture that may not be able to grasp all of the fine points, and then we get way astray. We think they're saying one thing and they're not saying that. They're actually saying something else, but they don't quite know how to phrase it in a way that English-speaking Western people will hear it in the way that their Eastern mentality hears it. That's what I'm trying to say. The principles are the same.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, well, I'm not going to say bothers me, but I see as a intellectual problem, is that whenever we talk about God, it implies that it's outside of us. And there has to be a terminology where we understand, since we are divine beings and we're really extensions of the in fact, everything around us is extensions of what's divine. When we talk about what God wants, I mean, hold on, isn't that part of me? I mean, so it's making a distinction between the two, but I don't see any distinction between us as divine beings and God. So how do we then put it in terms? Of course, we're using terms that the religious folks can understand, because that's how they always talk about it. Jesus Christ is God. It's always something outside themselves. And in our meetings on Saturdays, back in, when we do our mad science meetings and so forth, everyone seems to use terminology that does not really imply that they are divine beings. They're always talking about it in terms of a third person. It's outside them. And so how do we get around that? How do we that?
That's why I go into these names so much, like all that is. For a long time, I've tried to encourage people to use the word Ati, A-T-I, all that is, instead of God. And what I'm realizing could work even better is just to use the word reality with a big R.
Yeah, that would include us all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Ati
that's
is another name that it's easy to try to
Yeah.
do that anthropomorphic thing with,
yeah,
or it's something outside of us as opposed to reality.
right.
That's good.
People,
Not-
yeah, people have adopted the terminology that allows them to do that. They might say that they believe that they are divine beings and that we're all connected and so forth, but in their conversation, you'd never be able to tell it because they
No.
don't have the right words to express it.
Well, they don't have the right conception. They're still operating
That's true.
from the place that God is out there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So even in this conversation tonight, a lot of people have used the word he relating to God and stuff like that. And there is no he. So it's not wrong or it's not bad. I want to stress that again. It's baby steps lead to bigger steps, which lead to bigger steps. And enlightenment requires people, just like trying to study quantum mechanics. If you're a classical Newtonian physicist, and Don would know this better than anybody, you have to give up some ideas in order to step into that world of quantum mechanics and where consciousness can control the effect. Who the observer is depends on how the experiment's going to come out.
Mhm. The
So I've,
programmed is a problem from the time of birth to have the
Yeah.
perspective of everything outside of ourselves, God outside of ourselves, and all that. It takes quite a bit to reprogram that we are God, we are a part of God, and everything's a part of God.
And I just want to leave you with one thought. When we do peyote or mushrooms or ayahuasca or buffotain, the toad, I've done all of those things.
Mhm.
There is real magic in this world. And there are things that will happen during a peyote meeting that will totally blow your rational mind. And I've done many peyote meetings with doctors and other people who, and they're rational and they're blah, blah, blah. And they walk out of that meeting the next day and they're not the same person. They've seen things and they've witnessed things inside of themselves that they didn't even know was there.
Mhm.
And that's
What were
all.
you going to say? Yep. Don, you were about to say something. What were you about to say?
yeah, that obviously it's very late, but I want to throw a question out to Lono that maybe we can address next time. So we, at least in Western culture, think of, let's call it we using your terms, the reality of all that is, as basically, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. So why does all that is need to create? Isn't it sufficient to just be? And I know there are several different answers, or I'm sure many more than I'm even aware of, answers as to why the all that is, the one, the everything, thought it necessary to create this entire universe, and who knows how many of the universes that it has already created. But the question is why? Isn't it sufficient in and of itself? So why is creation necessary? What purpose does it solve? Not solve, but what purpose is it for the all that is to be involved in what amounts to continuous creation? So
We will talk
I'd
about
love to know.
a wonderful thing to talk about next week.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave
Yeah,
you.
I'd like to. Yeah. Well, I'd like the Huna perspective on it.
Yeah.
I have other groups' perspectives. I'd like the Huna perspective.
Right.
I'll just leave this idea with you to ponder until next week, and we'll talk about this more next week. the Mo'o, the ancient Hawaiians, the real guys, they said that the only thing God needs is a mirror.
Hmm.
Okay?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We'll talk about that next week.
Okay.
Excellent
Great.
question. One
Sounds
question.
good. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you all for
Thanks for
being here
meeting.
tonight. We love you
Thank
all.
you.
We appreciate you. I hope that you got something out of it. Please tell your friends. Let's let this group grow.
Mhm.
The more
Okay.
people that we can, and again, I want to leave this at the end of every meeting. I want to say this. The whole point of doing this family is to create a group of people that can put out the message that God is all that is, and that what we owe one another is divine respect. Because until we start looking at life that way, what's ahead for us in this world is going to be very painful.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's why we're doing this work. And that's why I hope that you would be make it a point to share with people. This is not some goofy little meeting that is a waste of your time. This is something that's really important to learn. So I love you. I thank you all. I appreciate you being here. And we're going to say a closing prayer.
Okay. All right, let's just close our eyes and breathe nice and deep. Thank you so much for all of this incredible wisdom that we've been given, and the ability to really step into divinity and step into our mana and know that we have the ability to create miracles in our life, and we have the ability to find strength in our group and in all the people who come and join us. Help us to have a great week, to remember that we create everything in our lives, and it's important that we stay true to who we are, and to also help others and be in a place of service this week, and keep that aloha spirit with us. And we say this humbly, mindful of our divinity and in the spirit of aloha. Amen.
Yahoo.
Amen.
Amen. See you
Amen.
guys. See you
Thank
tomorrow.
you so much. Appreciate you
Bye
all.
now.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, Lono, I got a question as we
Yeah.
sign off. Did the gentleman in Raton ever get a hold of you for the
No.
test? Okay. He hasn't responded to me yet, so I just was wondering.
Okay.
Um,
Let them know I'm waiting.
Okie, and I'm
One
gonna
of the-
send you those two links to the Y files.
Thank
I
you.
think you'll really enjoy them. They take about 35 minutes each. And ask the questions that we ask. It's very, very interesting.
Okay.
Wait, Chris,
This
what
is
do you-
Chris. Are we on for tomorrow then?
We're
Wednesday?
on for tomorrow.
Okay.
Very
Thank
good.
you, Chris. We're going to get started about 9. Jim's
Okay.
going to come. I think John is going to be there. Of course, Pete will be there. As useless as I am, I'll be there. And Lonnie,
you make me laugh.
she'll do it. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye.
And John, if you want to drive, oh, he took off. I was going to get him to drive down. Okay. Thank you, Chris. See you later.
See you later.